Hello, my name is Rebecca Aguayo, and I am going to give a presentation of my essay, A Day Never Forgotten in America. The event that I chose is 9/11, only because that was probably my first introduction, I would say, to terrorism, witnessing it as a young child. I was probably in the fifth grade when this happened. It occurred on September 11th, of course, 2001, when 19 radical extremists, an Al Qaeda group originally from Sudan, but now they are located in Afghanistan, they carried out suicide attacks against the United States by hijacking four planes. American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767-200ER, and United Flight 175, also Boeing 767-200ER, hit the Twin Towers in New York. The third plane, American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757-200, hit the Pentagon outside of Washington, D.C. And the fourth one did not actually complete the mission because civilians on that plane noticed what was going on and they stopped the hijackers. But the reason they had a chance to notice what was going on was because that flight was delayed. So many people were contacting them, or they're seeing on the news or on their phones that New York was being attacked. So that did give them a head start. But unfortunately, that plane, the United Airlines, my mistake, Flight 93 Boeing 757-200, actually crashed in a western Pennsylvania field, and no one survived that one. Al Qaeda was able to inflict more damage to the U.S. than the Soviet Union had done throughout the Cold War, and all it took were 19 men who were armed with small knives to create mass destruction and endless fear to the American people. I mean, they accomplished that because I clearly still remember it. This 9/11 tragedy was basically designed for drama. It was to create an aura of fear because they murdered thousands of innocent Americans. It was roughly almost 3,000 people, but this triggered a lot of major U.S. initiatives to combat terrorism. Basically, it's the birth of Homeland Security and TSA and many more laws and agencies that fall under Homeland Security. So, significance. The significance is, of course, the birth of Homeland Security itself. Homeland Security, it is significant because it created many new laws and agencies under it, given the aftermath of 9/11, which prompted officials. I mean, their ultimate goals from the terrorists were to create so much fear that the Western institutions would have to change their behaviors, their ways. It is most significant transformation of the US government in over half a century by largely transforming. Homeland Security has only been around for approximately 16, almost 17 years. So what is Homeland Security? Here is its mission. I pulled this from their webpage. It says mission includes preventing terrorism and enhancing security by managing our borders, administering immigration laws, securing cyberspace, and ensuring disaster resilience. My mistake. So, Homeland Security continued. For example, some of the agencies that fall under it are United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Federal Emergency Management Agency, U.S. Immigration, Customs Enforcement, Transportation, Security Administration, United States Coast Guard, which has been around, but a lot of things changed, and it was distributed under Homeland Security, National Protection and Programs, United States Secret Service. So here are some of the logos that might look familiar to you. I know a lot of them look alike because of the eagle, but there's basically 22 different federal departments and agencies into a unified integrated cabinet agency. So some of the principles and theories are, although there is no exact answer as to why Al Qaeda did what they did in 9/11, there are many theories and conspiracies floating around. The man behind it, though, on the 9/11 attack is a radical religious leader, Osama bin Laden. He was an astute tactical leader and rational political actor fighting a deeply felt religious war against the West. His method of choice in fighting was to adopt terrorism as a shortcut for transforming the political landscape. Bin Laden based his justification on war on a corpus of Muslim beliefs and foundation. and found ammunition in the Quran to give his war Islamic legitimacy. Since bin Laden had total dominance of Al Qaeda, that themselves, sorry, totally lost that. That meant the organization was hostage to his strategic vision. Since Osama bin Laden's followers consider themselves an island of true believers surrounded by a sea of iniquity, they think that the future of religion depends on them and their battle. So in the book and throughout the course, religion does play a huge part in terrorism, how it anchors some people because they make up their own ideologies and believe that what they're doing is justified given the religion. So religion incorporated, for one thing, we know 9/11 was somewhat influenced by religion because of the organization Al Qaeda. In the history of humanity, religion has always had an important factor. According to Susanna Pierce, she is in our book, she states that strong religious beliefs can increase not only the likelihood for the religious conflict, but also the intensity of fighting. Violence results when sacred traditions are threatened, and the cosmic consequences of failure means that victory is the only option available to faith. So basically, it's saving their faith. Al Qaeda has this belief, and they believe we are infidels. They think that the Christian-Jewish alliance is conspiring to destroy Islam. So, of course, they're going to fight it, and they're going to fight it with violence. According to Jessica Stern, an American scholar and academic on terrorism, terrorist groups build up their own mythologies to justify their actions to a story. And when mythological truths compete, violence often results. So, in the aftermath of 9/11, bin Laden said, "What America is tasting now is something insignificant compared to what we have tasted for years, and that the Islamic world has been tasting this humiliation and this degradation for 80 years. Neither America nor the people who live in it will dream of security before we live in it, Palestine, and not before the infidel armies leave the land of Muhammad." Bin Laden's attacks on the U.S. have shaped an ideological movement with extremists and is still gaining further adherents. As the book tells us, jihadists are not attacking state power, but are attacking the idea of Western, particularly American culture, because their war is with the global system that they fear and hate, but most of all resist being included in economic arrangement they resent. This includes all extremists and not just jihadis. So the impact that it had on American citizens was pretty immense. I mean, it really did stick with me, and I was only 9 or 10 years old when that happened. It's been about 17 years since then, and the effects of the aftermath are still rippling until today. It has changed America's way of living. One of the ways that it extremely changed, I'm going to start with TSA, only because I honestly probably did not board an airplane until I was 13. So I had no idea what it was like to walk into an airport and just go straight to a gate. I just know how TSA works. You go in, you have to take your shoes off, anything with metal, anything in your pockets. There's rules about certain amount of ounces going on a carry-on. TSA was created to secure and protect when there's mass transportation. So that's one big thing that was created. So you basically have to change your life. You have to get to the airport early. You have to make sure what you're packing. You have to just be very meticulous in the things that you're doing in an airport. Another example is our privacy is not so private anymore because the U.S. Patriot Act. In a nutshell, the Patriot Act is to make significantly easier for law enforcement agencies to search, among other things, medical, telephone, financial records. Even till today, laws are made because of 9/11, just like the Real ID Act. It's basically you're going to need 2 forms of identifications to board a plane starting in 2020. Depending on the state that you live in. I know California now offers that ID. They started, I want to say, in January of this year. And it's just for more purposes tied into what 9/11 happened. If you want to get on an airplane, if you want to go on a military base, you're going to eventually need it. But again, it all depends on what state you live in. This also includes domestic flights. So I also want to talk a little bit more about how it changed millennial generations, which I believe my generation is considered millennial. Most of all, it affected my lifestyle as well. 9/11 was the first terrorist act I witnessed on TV as a child. I was at an age where I could understand, see what was happening. Since then, I always take a second look at my surroundings. I'm always scanning things, being observant. I have a habit of counting exits in every room that I go in, which I think is good for anything. And I always have an emergency kit, whether it's in my car, within my purse, but always be prepared just because you never know what's going to happen. I've completely altered my life since that incident, and I've never really noticed it until I took this course. Until I start realizing, like, wow, this really did change, my way of thinking, my way of habits, and just in everyday life. But then at the same time, I also ask myself, could America have traded too much liberty for security? So, what are future action plans that America has made since then? Here are just a few. After 9/11, many programs were created to secure our nation's safety in order to prevent another 9/11 from happening in the future. Some of those programs, aka future plans, were Stellar Wind University programs, President Surveillance Program, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which was amended in 2008, Intelligence Reform, and Terrorist Prevention Act, and many more. Some of the details of those programs are Stellar Winds program. It's basically gathering activities involving data, mining a large database of the communications of American citizens, including email conversation, phone calls, financial transactions, and internet activity. Many universities are now teaching some classes that examine the psychological of terrorist and rogue regimes. These classes are largely the result of Homeland Security Institute, and they are influencing the way we look at terrorism research in general, which I think is great. We should all be educated. PSP is a collection of secret intelligence activities that was authorized publicly by George W. Bush. That basically is warrantless tapping international communications. And then the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act prohibits any form of illegally intercepting, disclosing, using phone calls, so on and so forth. The Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act is composed of several separate titles with varying subject issues and affect U.S. federal terrorism law. Although there are many laws, programs, it is all because of 9/11, and we have been very prepared, yet very fearful the past few years. So my final thoughts would be that it left America with a deep scar, which we will always have to live with. America's weaknesses were exposed on that day just because, like a TSA, you could just walk into an airport and basically go straight to your gate. No one thoroughly checked you and identified you. So I think that's good regardless. On the other hand, like I'm saying, it strengthened our policies and created many new programs, to fight terrorism. I believe because of 9/11, laws will constantly be evolving and changing in the American way of life, just like that REAL ID Act. I mean, 9/11 happened almost 17 years ago, and new laws are still coming from it, which, I think it's great that we're learning. But as the book states, in the history of humanity, religion has always had an important factor, and many terrorists will always justify their actions because of religion. So terrorism, what we learn in this course, there's domestic, there's international, but terrorism doesn't have an actual meaning. There is a meaning, but it's not a certain meaning where it can only mean one thing. It can mean many things to many people. But as our book and our professor puts it, it is a social construct. The way people view reality, groups construct a framework around a concept defining various aspects of their lives through the meaning they attribute to the construct. So basically, it could be used to notify people. It can be used to put fear in it. So terrorism can mean many different things, but in the end, it is an act of violence. And it's against typically, someone in authority or the government. And this is definitely against the American government, which is why it is so important to know about 9/11 and how it totally changed our government and our policies. So that is why I chose that event.